So one thing we have is we have an item, and then we might have other items that are kind of connected to it, right? So like this. And like that, okay? So now if I have these items here, and I want to take this into Mari, and I wanted to paint these items so that they look like they're all part of the same item, it doesn't help me to take each item in individually, right? I can't take this item in, paint it, and then bring it back into Maya, because what's going to happen is it's not going to look nice and fluid. It's not going to look like they're part of the same object. On this item here, I may have like rust or darkness or something else happening around there. So what I need to do is I need to, number one, lay out the UVs for this. Because they're all boxes, I'm just going to do automatic for it, just to take it the simple route out. There we go. And then if I were to grab all of these and then export them and bring them into Mari, it just would not go. It would go, but it wouldn't work, okay? Right now, all my UVs are on top of each other. So every box I created, all those UVs are on top of each other. So if I were to try to paint this, it would basically, I'd paint one item and all the items would get painted the exact same way, okay? So what I need to do is separate each one of these boxes into a different grid. So inside here, inside our UV editor, we have this bottom box. Now this bottom box goes on forever this way, not on, it goes 10 units that way, and then that box goes up 25-ish units. I think it's 25 is the limit. Okay, so essentially that gives us 250 squares that we could use. So on here, if I went to shell, let me just grab this box. If I went to shell and I grabbed all of these, I can come over here to where this arrow is and just type in 1, I believe the default's 0.1, and just hit the arrow over. And so what it does is it moves that UV into the next box over. Okay. Now let me grab this one and do the same thing. Shell, grab it, and I'll move it 2 units over. Grab this one, 3 units over. Okay, so I should have this one in the first one, second one, third one, fourth one. Okay, and if I go to my view and I go to grid option box, you can see those other shells. So I say tile lines and grid lines every 1 unit, should be good. And my length and width, I'll put 10. There we go. So now each one of these is in a separate little box area. Now I'm going to shrink these down a bit because I like these not to be right at the edges. Okay. So this is very similar when I show the environment and I show doing like the piece of paper where I would offset that piece of paper into the different tiles. This is pretty similar to what that is. Okay. So now each of these go out. So this could go, I could have 10 different items going this way, and then I would have 25 going up that way. The grid display doesn't matter, you just have to trust that it's there, okay? Now I can't also have these sticking out over the other ones, so I can't have it going like this, where it's intersecting 2 of those, that's a no-no. We keep it right inside the box. So all the pieces for your instructional item, you want to separate and lay out into those different boxes. So I may move it 1 over and 1 up just to get it to a different grid unit. Okay? You could also just move it. Like I could just grab this and I could just move it right up there, and as long as it fits without intersecting, I'm good. It's just easier just to go boop, and there it is. Alright. So then what I'm going to do is take this into Mari. So I'm just going to export this out as an OBJ. Mari test. And what this is going to allow me to do is not paint 1 texture at a time, but actually paint 4 textures. I have 4 items, 4 UVs. It'll create a separate texture for each UV. So when we did something like a character, we're not going to do it for our character, but when they do a Hollywood character, they actually break the face into like 4 to 6 different pieces and separate those faces, the face, into 4 to 6 separate pieces. That way they have enough resolution to get all that detail. So let's go to a new document. I'll say test Mari. I will choose that this is going to be from the P drive, from Sarcona. 2510 work. I'm going to create a color map. I'm going to make sure that my merge geometry into one is fine. Create groups. Yes, yes, yes. Okay, color, good. Everything's good. Okay. There it is. All right, so now there's our item inside of Mari. So now I could go in to my image manager and I could bring in an image, okay? So I can go out here and find an image. I find it easier just to go to my P drive and find my images. And it doesn't matter if the images are, it doesn't matter where they're located because we're just using them temporarily. We drop them in, we paint them, and then we get out of there. So here's metal, here's wood. I'll just drag those into this. So we don't have to worry about setting a project, we just drop them in. So I'm going to drop the metal on here. And it's thinking, there we go. There we go. So I could go in here and I could paint it right like this, or I could go into my ortho UV. There it is. And you'll see how I brought over all the UVs. And then I could paint right on here. That way I don't have to worry about rotating the object. I just paint right on the specific item. So that makes it much easier. Imagine we have a logo. We want to just slap it there. We don't want to rotate and try to deal with that. So we just do it this way. So I can also paint this one. R and then dragging. All your hotkeys are right here. See where where that is. So R, rotate, whatever. There we go. All right, now because I moved it, you see that it actually like threw it off. So let me just repaint. Oops, that's not the one. There we go. All right, so now I can jump back to perspective, or sorry, ortho. And I have all the stuff that's painted on there. Now it doesn't look pretty. This is definitely not meant to be a pretty picture, but it'll work for what we're doing. Drop this item in here. I can shrink this image down. I can zoom in. Shrink my brush. I'll paint some wood right here. Good. Wonderful. Okay, so now let's say I want to add some rust inside here. So I can go to my regular brush. I can go to my shelf, and I can pick just one of these like scrappy brushes. Here's metal, I don't know what it says, metal something. I'm going to go down to my layers. I'm going to make a new layer. I'm going to go to my color. I'll pick a color. Maybe. There we go. And ideally it works just to paint actual pictures. Using the image manager, dropping it on there, and painting a picture of rust. Find a picture of rust, paint the rust. But for this, it works just to kind of show it off. So now I can paint this. Now, if you look, I'm painting on both items. That's a definite something I don't want to do. So I'm going to hit undo. And what I can do is go up here to my selection. So right now it's saying set to patch mode. Okay, and patch mode means UV patch. So if I go to that, go to my selector, go to my UVs, and I click on this, it'll show me what's actually selected. So that's that item. I believe it was 2 or 3. 2. There we go. Okay, so I've selected this item. So now when I go back to my paintbrush and I go to my projection, I'm going to tell it that I only want to paint on selected only. Okay, so I'll go back to ortho. Now when I go in here and paint, it's only going to paint on that selected item. So I have, again, more control over what I'm doing. I can just paint right on that specific item. I'll hit Alt so it bakes it in. Now what I've done is I've lost my texture underneath. I had this horribly nice wood texture underneath, and now I have this orange, and I want to just make those two happen together. If I go to my layers, I can go to here and just change how the top layer is interacting with the bottom layer. So maybe I change it to color, and now that orange is affecting it. It's bleeding through onto that other side. Cool. So now I can just continue on. I'll go to this one, and I'll paint some little splotchiness happening around here. The important thing is that I have those other items in my scene still, so that I could paint right on top of this while seeing where those items are at. If I didn't have those items, it'd be very difficult to try to line all that stuff up. That looks gorgeous. I'll pick a different brush, and maybe I'll add another layer here, and I'll make this bigger. There we go. And let me switch my buttons here. There we go. So I'm going to go to my color, and I'll pick something else. Sure. There we go. Perfect. Hit Alt, it bakes it in. I can come over here and change my mode. Okay, so the point is that you're not locked in. Just like Photoshop, you have the ability to edit this stuff and play with it and tweak it and whatever else. That looks kind of neat. All right, that's good enough for what we're doing. All right, wonderful, beautiful. All right, so now what I want to do is select something else. So I'm going to grab this again. I'm going to click on one of these items. And I don't have to do it in the UV editor. When I click on an item, it'll automatically grab that patch because this is set to select by patch. Okay? Now I could also come over here to select by face, and then it will allow me to select just the face. Now you'll see that it also has these as triangles. When we go from a Maya file to an OBJ, it triangulates everything. So we have essentially two faces for each face. So I could just grab these 4 faces here, go back to my paintbrush, and now I'm only painting on those 2 faces. Okay, so again, more stuff that you can do to kind of customize what you're doing. Under the projection stuff, under the mask, there's a whole bunch of other masks too, which are kind of neat. One of them is a fractal mask. This is a really, really cool one. What it does is it puts basically a noise pattern over everything and allows you just to paint in certain areas. So let's say that I had my image, there it is. Did I find any more images while I was out? Here's another wood one, here's another wood one. All right, that's a good one. Drop that in. That's just random stuff. Okay, so I'm going to drop this wood on here. There we go. I'm going to select object or patch mode. I'll select this one. I'm going to go back to my projection painting. There it is. And I'm going to make sure I can see my mask. So right now my mask is disabled, so I'll enable the mask so I can see it. And if you look, you'll see this like red noisy pattern on top of everything. So what's going to happen is as I paint now, it's only going to paint in certain areas. And I could come into my my fractal noise, and I could change my settings. So I could change the contrast, so it's much more contrasty. I could lower the contrast. I could change the roughness of it. I could change the size of it. And so now as I get closer and I start painting, let me turn the mask off so I don't have to see it right now. As I start painting, it's not painting a pretty picture of the wood, nice and smooth. What's happening is it's only painting it kind of like a mask area where we're only seeing certain parts. So what happens is we get a much more natural, much more realistic looking texture. There we go. Okay. So lots of different tools that you can play with inside of here to tweak what you want your stuff to look like. And then once you have all your stuff painted, obviously the next step is to get it back into Maya. Okay. Now looking at what we have here, you have to analyze your surface. What is it, right? So pretending that this is a piece of wood. Let's say we had a piece of wood and that wood had a tile texture to it, right? So it was like planks of wood that are inside there. And then someone came along and they spray painted something on top of it. If someone took it and they spray painted, I'll just make a new layer and spray paint. I have to select something because nothing's selected. I'll select that. Sure. Go back to my regular brush. Perfect. Okay. So someone comes along and they spray painted something on top of this. What we can't do is we can't go through and export this out as one flattened texture and put it on our object and apply it as a bump map. Okay? if we applied this as a bump, what would happen is that SH would actually like bump out, okay? And it would most likely, in 99.9% of all cases, it would look funny having the SH bump out so much, because if it's spray painted, it would only bump out like maybe like a hair, okay? But I want to have a differentiation. I want it to look like the paint is actually on there. So what we would do is we would turn this off, export this out as a texture, and then turn this back on and export that out as a texture. I would have one that's my actual bump map and one that's my color map. So if you find that your stuff is not looking right when you get it back into Maya, consider going back into here and turning off some of your layers, okay, that don't make sense. All right, so I need to export this. So I'm going to go to my channels. I'm going to right click and I'm going to say export all channels. I only have one, so I'll just export it out. I recommend just make a folder, let it put its stuff in there, and then you could worry about the naming of all of your stuff later. So I'm just going to make a new folder here, right there. Leave all of this stuff alone, okay? This is how it names the stuff, so that when it comes into Maya, everything is happy. If you delete that stuff and you try to do it, number one, it won't export, and number two, Maya won't be happy. We don't want either of those things to happen. So we export all patches. And you just keep hitting export all patches, export all patches. Good. Okay. So one thing that's going to come out when we do this is every one of our layers here came out. MayaToMari export. All right. So here's my color base. So these were all the base colors that I did to it. So remember when I initially did the flat wood or metal, whatever texture that was? That's that layer. This layer here is that second layer that I did. There's the third layer that I did. And then here is that fourth layer when I did the spray painting of the SH on top of it, okay? So for most cases, again, we probably don't need all of this. I'm going to wipe this out. And I'm going to right click, and instead of going to export all channels, I'm going to say export flattened, okay? So I'm going to say export all channels flattened. Put it in the same folder. Export. I should only get one message, that one that popped up. Everything else should be good. Yep. Okay. Now if I needed a second one because I wanted to get rid of the SH on there, I turn this off. I export flattened again. And this is where I would add a number in here. So I would go to where this says $channel, and I put like an underscore bump. So what it should be called now is color underscore bump is what should come out of that. So if I go to the P drive, I go to my folder, I go to Mari done. We have 4 color flattened and we have 4 color bump flattened, okay? So now let's go back into Maya. Now if I took this and I added all of this to a new material, it doesn't matter what material, I'm just going to assign it to a Mila. And then I'm going to connect it to a file right there. And I'm going to grab my first image. So let me go and grab those images and put them into the right folder. Alright, so there's 4 images on here. In order for us to do what we're going to do next, we just have to make sure they're named correctly. So whatever Mari named it, we have not touched it. The only part we can touch is the start of this. So where this says color underscore bump, I could replace those, but I have to make sure that I replace each one with the exact same thing. So if I was just to get rid of color underscore bump, it would work perfect. Just bump, 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 bump. That would work. But I can't have this one bump 1, bump 2, bump 3. They all have to be named the exact same thing here, because at the end, that's where Maya will realize what's happening. So I'm going to grab the first one. I'm going to hit 6 so we can see it. Hopefully Maya won't crash. It doesn't. And what we're going to see is that it looks uniform on each one. So each one of these looks exactly the same, right? And it shouldn't look exactly the same. It should look, oops, where's Mari go? It should look like this. We should have these little orange things under here. This one should have some blue. This one should have some wood. This one should have whatever, okay? So this is where the magic comes in. Down here under UV tiling mode, this is like a new feature in I think 2015, we can go to UV tiling and say, hey, I used Mari, and then it goes away and I say generate preview. And what it's going to do is it's going to take each one of those textures and automatically line it up with the UV set that was appropriate to it. Okay, so now I've painted each one of those, and you can see now that it lines up, and there it is. There's my little orange blobs underneath. If I hit the right angle, right there, you can see it says SH right on top of it. Or right there-ish. Okay, and all of these now have their own UV stuff laid out. Now I could go through and do the, let me delete history on all this. There we go. I'm going to go do the bump material now. So I'm going to go to material properties. I'm going to go to the overall bump. I'm going to add a bump 2D. And then to the value area, I'm going to click this and map a file. And my file is just going to be this one. This should be the image texture without that SH on it. Now I have to do the same thing. It's not going to be apparent just by looking at it like this, but it will be apparent once I hit that other button. Okay, once I tell it that I'm using Mari, and then we say generate preview, then it should be apparent that each one of these surfaces have a different bump map to it. And they definitely do. And you can see how that SH is not bumping out right now. Okay, I'll even render it just so we can see. That the SH now looks like it's more painted on top of it. It looks like it's actually just like a coloring of the material and not a separate item bumping out of that, right? So that looks, not going to say it looks good, but it gets the point across, okay? Now if I did swap this with the other one, so just for fun, let me grab the original one that has the SH in it. I just re-hit generate preview. That updates all the stuff. There it is. What we're going to see now is that the SH, look at it, it's bumping into the surface. That makes no sense at all. There's no reason that my SH would actually bump into that surface. Okay, so that's why we rendered it separately from Mari so that we can have it without that SH. Now this was kind of a messy example of what happens to the one that I did, but it's exactly what I did, okay? I painted the texture. I wanted metal. I painted the metals to look like metal. I painted the woods to look like wood. If this item here is supposed to be glass, what I do is, you can't paint glass inside of Mari, but if there's a texture applied to the glass, I can paint that inside of Mari, right? So if I have scuff marks, if I have fingerprints, if I have scratches or whatever else, that's what I'm painting inside Mari. And then I bring that in here. I just make a brand new material. So let's pretend that that one's glass. So I'm going to say this is transmissive, so it's glass, see-through. And I go to my color. I go to my file. I go to my folder. I tell it that I use Mari. I tell it to generate a preview. It automatically finds where that specific tile is. I'm going to save it just so it doesn't crash. And what we should get is that far right one should now be glass with that texture applied to the color channel. And that may be hard to see under the lighting conditions, but you can definitely see this one looks different. It still has that texture applied, it still has the dirt or grime or whatever it is on top of it, that this one does not. Let me crank it up a little bit just so you can see it better on the projector. Okay, so there's definitely some transparency happening here and on this. Now, one thing that you may have to keep in mind as you're doing this is that as I'm painting on here, let's see, this is that layer, and then this is my rust layer. Okay, so as I'm painting on here, and I grab my brush, and I go like this. Oops, I don't have anything selected. There we go. Let me turn my masks off. They're off. Paint on selected only. Oh, it is painting. I just have the opacity way down. Maybe. Oh, so I'm painting color, and my color is set to this. There we go. There we go. Okay. So as I'm painting this, it's actually not painting behind this object. Okay? That object is not visible or not being shown. So what I can do is I can always go to selection, hide unselected. And then I could fill in that area. Okay? So sometimes you want to have this little border around it, especially if you had an item where you may want to smooth it out. That smoothing needs to have those UVs kind of in place. So I could do this, and then I could paint on top of there. Realistically, this is just for kind of placement of where they're at, and then the rest of it is just me doing my thing. Okay, so it comes over here, comes down, hide unselected, and I can see exactly where that goes, and I can paint it, and then do the same export, same Mari, tiling, whatever. Your workflow is not going to be go into Maya, go into Mari, and go back to Maya. It's going to be bouncing back and forth between the two programs. As you start to tweak your settings, you may have to go through and paint another surface here and realize you need to paint. You may need to offset the UVs, fix some stuff, and then move things back into line. Okay? So don't think that it's just going to be jump into it for 5 minutes right before this thing is due, get some paint on there, jump back into Maya, render a movie out. No, you have to actually do some more work. Okay? And keep layers. If you don't keep layers and you do everything on one, it's going to be very difficult to go back later and tweak anything, right? If you need to take, like this looks horrible the way this is, but just by turning a couple of these off, I can get it to a pretty decent state. Where now I'm back to square one basically, right? So I always paint like my flat color, just my base color, and then add other stuff on there. Keep in mind too, you can take any of these images into Photoshop and tweak colors and then just save it exactly as it is. So if I realize I didn't like this pattern here on this one, I could bring that image into Photoshop, do a hue and saturation, do a levels, do a curves, do a whatever to it. Save it out, bring it back into Maya exactly as it's named, and it'll work perfectly. Okay? Or I could go back into Mari, make a brand new layer, and just go crazy with whatever this is. Just like that. And then set this to something. There we go. Gorgeous. Save that out, bring that back into Maya. Okay? So try to get this workflow. Especially remember on the 11th, the same day that this stuff is due, we're doing our challenge, our second challenge. So you want to make sure that you have these kind of workflows ready to go so that the day of, you're not like, hey, I forgot how to do Mari, I forgot how to do this, I forgot how to do that. You know the workflow. You know how to get from Maya into Mari, back to Maya, back to Mari, and so forth, and then get it rendered out. Okay? All right. Any questions?